and Ramadan Mubarak. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to our research training course, which is organized by King Fahd Specialist Hospital in Dammam and the E1 cluster in collaboration with eveint Tرووب. My name is Dr. Iman Nasim, and I am the IRB chair of King Fahd Specialist Hospital Dammam. Today we will start with our first module, Research Ethics, which will be composed of 3 lectures. History of research ethics. Second one will be about research ethics during COVID-19 pandemic. And the third one will be informed consent process. Our first speaker for tonight is Dr. Salwa Sheikh. She is graduate of Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., with American Board Certification in Anatomic, Clinical, and Hematopathology. She is an advocate for research and development and has special interest in medical ethics. She has established the Institutional Review Board at Johns Hopkins Aramco Healthcare Center, Dhahran, and she continues to chair it, as well as she is a member of our IRB at Hospital. She is to be appointed adjunct assistant professor of pathology at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Baltimore, and has become the first Saudi woman team leader representing College of American Pathology for accreditation. She has more than 80 publications, including chapters in textbooks. She's a reviewer in several medical journals, and she conducts national and international professional educational sessions, conferences related to pathology, medical ethics, and institutional review board. Thank you so much, Dr. Salwa, for being here with us, and I leave it for you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Dr. Iman, for the kind introduction. And I would like to begin today by expressing my sincere gratitude, first of all, for the audience, for their time and interest to join us in this webinar, and also for the organizers to make this great event happen. Since this is a series of lectures, I actually would like to, and I am the person who is starting the first lecture, my talk will be mainly focused on real basic concepts or fundamentals of research ethics and regulatory requirements. I will actually start my talk by talking about the historical background of medical research, and then we'll move on to ethical conduct and regulatory requirements with very few words about institutional or ethical review board for research. Now, there are different types of research. We have clinical research, which involves patients. We have basic research, which involves work in cellular, molecular, and physiological mechanisms involving patients. And this is really a rapidly evolving field. And then we have the translational research that actually uses application of basic research into clinical practice. And this is what we refer to as bench to bedside research. And really, if we want to see the true value of research, it lies in its ability to gather information and make it useful and applicable for patients in their diagnosis and treatment. Now, evolution of research traverses through a very long and fascinating journey. These are random examples. We can see the work of William Harvey on circulatory system in 1628, development of DNA, insulin, work on anesthesia, Louis Pasteur's germ theory, and the famous discovery of penicillin by Alexander Fleming in 1928. We also must not forget our own Arab and Muslim scientists. For example, Muhammad ibn Zakaria Radi, he was the first physician to detail the symptoms and signs of smallpox and measles, and he was a pioneer in experimental medicine. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi was referred to as the father of modern surgery. He actually created dissolvable sutures made of catguts. Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, is one of my favorite scientists. He was the first one to recognize the contagious nature of tuberculosis and also that diseases can be disseminated through water and soil. Ibn Sina has more than 1,000 publications, including many books, and one of his very famous textbook, which is the Canon of Medicine, or Al-Qanun fi al-Tib, has been used and is still used in several areas. It was one of the common textbooks that was used in European universities. And the list continues, and more scientists came after that. If you go back even further, the first study I could find was actually in year 562 before Common Era by King Nebuchadnezzar II, who was a king of Babylon. And he did a clinical trial where he was comparing two different groups of individuals, where one group was fed meat and wine and the other bread and pulses. So when we talk about research, the most important thing is to have research integrity for research to do and perform their research activities. And it is a very delicate balance between two major goals. You want to have advancement of science and research by doing research, while maintaining protection of human subject welfare. Ethically, really, it is a very difficult task to maintain this balance by researchers. Since I mentioned ethics, I would like to talk a little bit about the definition of ethics. Although we can find it in any dictionary, if we see what is ethics, it is defined as correct rules of conduct, but it's always mind-boggling to me. What is really correct rule of conduct? Is it the morals? Is it the principles? Is it common sense? Is it right versus wrong? What we as children are being taught by our parents and society to follow the right thing and avoid the wrong, but who actually defines right from wrong? History of medicine, if you go back to it, medical research shows that it has succeeded in improving the well-being of patients in much of the world. However, these successes are not without a cost. If you go back to major innovations in studies, many of them have tragedies behind them. And in some studies, these participants or human subjects who the studies were performed on costed their health and sometimes even their lives. I'm not expecting anyone to read this slide, but these are just a few examples of the studies. Thousands and thousands of studies have been performed, but there are some studies who actually changed the medical knowledge, changing the diagnosis and treatment of patients. Really great innovations. And these are the same studies as examples where major violations have been made for patients' human rights and dignity. And I would like to talk about some of these examples. For example, in 1920, Henry Cotton, who was a psychiatrist, he believed that insanity was actually a toxic disorder. He thought that the patients have mental illness because they had infected teeth. And so he started removing the teeth of these patients. Subsequently, some of these patients were not really improving. So he believed that the infection has actually spread. So he pursued to remove organs and body parts from these mentally ill patients. Dr. Cotton performed surgeries on more than 650 patients, and the mortality rate was 30% in his patients. In 1939, a study was performed in Iowa. Later on, it was named the Monster Study. This was done by an assistant professor, Johnson, who himself used to stutter. And he believed that he was normal when he was up to the age of 5 or 6, and he was given negative feedback by his teachers, subsequent to which he started stuttering. So he recruited one of his graduate students, and they decided to do a study on children, normal, healthy children, where they will give positive feedback to half of them and negative feedback to the other half, and see the impact whether normals will stutter and stuttering kids will stop and improve in their speeches. So they recruited 22 orphans and did the study. And the results were actually quite disturbing because many of the individuals or the children who were giving negative feedback developed psychosocial and mental illnesses, which in some cases lasted for a lifetime. Later on, an apology was released and more than $1 million compensation was given to some of the affected individuals. Another study in New York, in Willowbrook School, which is a school for children and adolescents who had mental disabilities. And many outbreaks were reported from this school of hepatitis. Later on, it was discovered that the scientists there, they were feeding live virus to these children and adolescents. And the purpose of the study was to actually see the progression and progression of the disease and see how they can prevent it. In 1950, a very young, enthusiastic urologist, Dr. Perry Hudson in Manhattan, decided to study more extensively about the prostate cancer, who really at that time was an incurable disease. So he recruited 1,200 alcoholic men who were homeless, and they were offered 4 to 5 days of hospital admission, shelter, and good meals, three meals a day, for an open prostate biopsy. At the time of the biopsy, they will do frozen section, and if the patient has cancer, they will proceed to develop open radical prostatectomy or orchiectomy and give them diethylstilberal. The mortality rate for his patients, those who did not have cancer, was 20%, and for those who had cancer was 30%. In 1951, Henrietta Lack, which many of you probably would have heard about her, she was admitted to hospital, a mother of 5 with cervical cancer, and died there in Baltimore. Part of her tumor was taken for development of immortal cell line, which is one of the oldest cell lines used in scientific research, the HeLa cell line. Great discovery, noble work, but the patient was never informed and she never consented for this piece of tissue to be removed from her and used as a cell line. This is one of the very famous studies, the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in African American population. It was a study on males in Alabama. The study started in 1932, and these participants were told that they will be receiving free healthcare from the government. Midway in 1947, penicillin was discovered as the treatment, curative treatment for syphilis. However, these scientists withheld this information, and this treatment was never given to the study participants. The scientists continued to follow them up and watch the progression of disease, and some people even die with the disease. The last study I want to talk about is the medical experiments that were performed in concentration camps in World War II. There were extensive studies that were done, and they used medical torture, in many cases leading to disfigurement, permanent disabilities, and death of the participants. They used transplant experiments without using any anesthesia. A lot of experiments were done on these prisoners using poison, high altitude, to see the impact of these agents on people, drowning experiences, drugs, infectious agents, sterilization, and horrific experiences on twins. There was vast amount of knowledge that was added to science and medicine by these experiments, especially the last one. A lot of information was gained, which had a lot of positive impact on medicine treatment and diagnosis. But really the big question is, was it the right thing to do? We are all healthcare workers. We all have a moral obligation to do the right thing. As doctors, we have even taken the oath to do no harm. So how come this balance was tipped? How come we only saw the positive side of the study and we never saw that the people were being tortured and they were dying? So based on these concentration camp experiences and the atrocities that were committed, there was a major trial that was held in Nuremberg in 1947, and it was called the Doctors' Trial. 23 people that were convicted, out of them 15 were found guilty, 7 were hanged, and 5 were given life sentences. And this was actually the first time that they released a set of formal guidelines for clinical research. And the main purpose here was to have an informed consent. No participant should be involved in any research without having informed consent. In addition, there is always a need for a third party or an independent ethical review of research before it is performed. Subsequent to that, in 1964, there was declaration by World Medical Organization of the ethical conduct. Many updates came afterwards. The main focus is the informed consent. After the publicity of the Tuskegee trial, the National Research Act was passed in 1974, not only focusing on informed consent, but voluntary informed consent. The patient, the participant has the right to voluntarily decide whether he would like to participate in the study or not. And also, there has to be an institutional review board or an ethical review board for the researchers. In 1979, the Belmont Report came out, which is the foundational document, and it summarizes all the ethical principles and guidelines for research involving human subjects. The core principles are 3. Respect for person is number 1, beneficence and justice. After the publicity of the Henrietta Lacks case, the common rule was passed in 1981, which was subsequently recently updated. And the list continues, and these regulations will continue to be updated based on more and more information that comes out. But the bottom line is the same. In any country, any code, everything, whatever you read, all the ethical codes advocate the same principle. Number 1 priority is the human well-being. Respect for person, it's his or her autonomy. They have to voluntarily decide whether they would like to be participating in the research or not. And when we talk about human subject, it's not only the direct interaction with the person himself, it's any data relevant to the person and any identifiable private information that the research is done on. So in Saudi Arabia, in 2001, a royal decree was passed by the custodian of the 2 holy mosques to develop actually and create a national committee for such activities. It was named at that time National Committee of Bio and Medical Ethics, which was later renamed as the National Committee of Bioethics in 2010. The royal decree has a certain committee membership, which involves many of the ministries and major institutions and government and non-government bodies, such as Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, National Guard, Human Rights, Saudi FDA, and so on and so forth. And usually, CACST oversees and chairs the National Committee. This is actually the website of the National Committee of Bioethics, and it has a lot of information. For example, there are always updates on the educational activities and the symposia that are being performed, and there is information for researchers. There is also a lot of information about the ethics and more information for the local committees or the IRBs. It also has very extensively written bylaws, both in Arabic and English, which talks about all the regulations and the requirements for the various types of studies. With the 2030 vision, there are even more enhancements and activities of these regulatory requirements and more activities by the Ministry of Health and National Committee of Bioethics. I would like to say a couple of words about the Institutional Review Board. It is the administrative body that actually reports to the highest authority in any institution. It reviews research involving human subjects And the main purpose is really not to review the scientific component and the type of study and the statistical analysis that will be done in the research, but is to ensure that the rights and welfare of these human participants are adequately protected. It is mainly to maximize safety of human participants. And they have to follow the guidelines, whether they are national and or international guidelines, and they must maintain all ethical codes pertinent to the human subjects. The membership is very unique. It's not just any committee. There should be mixed background, minimum of 5 regular members. The committee should represent different genders, different ethnic groups, different professions, and the most important member in the IRB committee is the community member, because he is the person who represents human subjects or the community. And without him, the members in the committee actually cannot vote on any research project that is reviewed. So what is supposed to be reviewed by IRB? All new studies, all new research activities are to come to IRB for review. Once approved, if there is any amendment or modification needed, it should come to IRB for approval before they are applied to the research. Also, if a research is approved by the IRB, there is a requirement by the investigator, the primary investigator, to have a continuous ongoing process of review and reporting to the IRB. There is a special focus on vulnerable population, and these are a group of individuals whose voluntariness and ability to make sound decisions can be compromised, either by undue influence or by coercion. And these include children, elderly, mentally disabled, unconscious people, poor socioeconomic status who can be influenced by, for example, food and shelter and money, people who have poor education and they have lack of awareness, prisoners who are under the influence, and pregnant women with fetuses. So there are special regulatory requirements when there is any research that involves this vulnerable group. When the researchers come to the IRB, they are usually stratified based on the risk, the level of risk. And once they are stratified, the level of risk determines the level of thoroughness of the review. Of course, every single proposal is thoroughly reviewed, but for example, the researchers with higher risk actually require full board review and voting process for the decisions. Again, not only the first time approval, but even the amendments, when they involve vulnerable group, there is a special regulatory requirements to make sure that these individuals are safe and their welfare is maintained. Once a proposal is approved, it must be done as it is approved. Any deviation or change cannot be applied before it is submitted again to the IRB and is approved by IRB. So everything was going fine and dandy. We have very oriented, knowledgeable healthcare workers. We are all adults. We know what is right from wrong. We're all ethical. And there is a third-party review by the IRB. So things should be perfect. Until between 1999 and 2000, there were 2 major incidents. There was death of a research participant in a gene therapy trial in Pennsylvania, and then another death of a normal volunteer in Baltimore. This actually prompted a major investigation by the Office of Human Subject Research Protection, and more than 10 centers, they actually stopped research activities from universities based on misconduct that was discovered. And some of the examples are here. There was still information and treatment being withheld by researchers from the participants. There were obvious conflicts of interest by researchers. As for IRBs, there were insufficient reviews. And the main purpose, I strongly believe that people, they are not having evil intentions, or at least most of them. And most of these mistakes were actually made because there was lack of knowledge about the regulatory requirements. And so after this investigation, there were certain modifications that were made. One of the main requirements now is all researchers and also the IRB members, they have to have human subject research protection certification. Whether they attend an online class or online module or a live class, there has to be certification before they start research activity. The National Committee of Bioethics has its own module for researchers and IRB members. And the other thing that was modified was the audits that are performed by National Committee of Bioethics and governing bodies for the IRBs and institutions. Now, as for NCBE, it usually audits the institutions at least once a year to ensure compliance with the relevant regulations. At the time of the audit, they require access to all the records and documents. They have the authority to cancel, suspend, and actually even terminate any study, any ongoing study. They also review any complaints or grievances against IRB decisions. And if any violation is discovered by the local committee, IRB, or a researcher, the National Committee can actually take it to the violation committee. And if the violation is confirmed, there are a set of penalties starting from warning, suspension of research, financial fine, even imprisonment. And not only these penalties are given to the researchers and the institution, but there is also publication of these decisions in 3 local journals. So there is a very strong link between the primary investigator, the IRB, and the National Committee of Bioethics, or any governing body in any country. The primary investigator, to start with, is supposed to perform the study exactly how he presented it and how it is approved by the IRB. Periodically, he is to submit reports to the IRB. The IRB submits periodic reports to the National Committee of Bioethics at least annually about all their research activities. The National Committee of Bioethics performs audits and actually may ask the IRB if they have any other queries. They also have the right, if needed, to contact directly the investigator and even the participants of any research, if needed. So since I am the chair of IRB, I would like to say just a couple of words about the IRB office. You know, there is an era before the IRB, before I established the IRB, and then there is an era which is after IRB, 2013, after I established IRB. Once you are involved in IRB office, you have to know you will never win any popularity contest. Your friends turn strangers, not really enemies, because they think that you are an obstacle now. You're making life difficult for them. You are preventing them to achieve their dreams of doing research. But we have to know that we are in the IRB office. It's a huge responsibility, and you must do the right thing as it is, following the regulations and requirements. Just looking at the applications is a huge challenge. To start with, you may get proposals that are poorly written, incomplete information, lack of certification. IRB review process of research is a very thorough and meticulous job if you're doing it the right way. The compliance, you need to maintain compliance of all the regulatory requirements. There are many reports that are generated by IRB office for the institution and for NCBE. There are still major challenges to actually find qualified, knowledgeable IRB administrators and members. And not only knowledgeable, but those members who are continuously updating their knowledge about regulatory requirements because it keeps changing. So in the last couple of slides, I want to highlight a major controversy that is ongoing in literature. Since establishment of the Belmont Report, mainly the 3 core ethical principles, there has been profound growth in medical research. And these continuing changes are raising questions as to the proper application of these core principles on up-to-date advanced research activities that we have these days, especially when it comes to clinical trials, because in these trials, we're comparing effectiveness of interventions. And the major argument by this group is that not all immoral or illegal acts must be tolerated, but the research should have some leeway to tolerate some activities where they think and they judge this to be necessary to do their work. So basically, not only this group is questioning the legitimacy of these established regulations, but also the capability of IRB or ethical committee, whether they are able to make sound judgment and review these up-to-date proposals. It is argued by them that increased regulations will not raise the ethical standards of science, but will probably worsen the quality of what these studies produce. So the million-dollar question is, do we need IRB or ethical review? And if you forget everything that I have said today, this is the one fact that you have to remember. The answer to this question is what you need to keep in your mind. The answer is yes, you have and you must need an IRB ethical review for all research activities. And why? It's not because the people's integrity is questioned, no. It's because no one can be objective about his or her own work. People, they underestimate the risks that are involved in things that they're very familiar with, and they overestimate the benefits when the work is very special to them, is close to their heart. So you definitely need a third party, an outsider, to review the research proposal before it is conducted for the ethical component and the well-being of these participants. So to conclude, I can only say that science really does not have a moral dimension. It is like a knife, how you use it. If you give it to a surgeon or a murderer, each will use it differently. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is right to do. Having said that, there must be an ethical, national or international framework of all these regulatory requirements, of course, in our part of the world, including Islamic Sharia law, to oversee these research activities and maintain the dignity and rights of these human participants. And I guess with this, I came to the end of my talk. I would be happy to take any comments or questions that you might have, and thank you all for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salwa. I think that you have really summarized the history, the fundamentals of Institutional Review Board in such an elegant way and in such a concise time, which is great. In the chat here, I don't see any questions. I think that you have really done it so well that people really don't have, I'm just seeing praise to your talk. This is what I'm seeing in the chat.
Thank you. I'm happy to take any comments also, positive or negative, regarding the controversy, ethical background, anything that you would like or the audience would like to discuss.
Well, I see none at this time, and I think in this case, although we are ahead of time, but I think that we are safe to say that we conclude for tonight. And we hope to see the audience in the next webinar, which is going to be held on Monday. And it's going to be at the different time. It will be morning, 11:30 p.m., where we are going to talk about COVID-19 research ethics. Thank you so much for joining us for today, and see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.